it isn't just the results of the weekend, as we were speaking before the break. It's deeper than that. What's going on in our weather pattern? You know, in North Dakota here, we just suffered of a severe drought in some counties in our state. We raise crops. That's what we do. Now you take a look at what happened in that whole line where the tornadoes struck. One tornado in particular that went longer and just went wider than what certainly people like me are used to. When we think of weather events, or when I do anyway, I think of Daryl Ritchison. Daryl, long time, you know, you may know him from his work on TV, but now I know him from his work with the North Dakota Agricultural Network. And first off, I want to make sure that we can explain exactly what that is. Daryl, good to have you back on the road with us.
Well, it's always good to be here.
Talk to me about what the North Dakota Agricultural Network is.
We are a network of right now 168 weather stations. And those weather stations all pretty much measure the same parameters. Some can measure soil, and others can't, as we're doing some upgrading. But we use all that data really to analyze the weather, and really in many ways it's a weather risk management tool. We're trying to manage the risk associated with weather. We can help farmers say time spraying, or maybe they don't have to spray this week, which saves them a lot of money because the weather isn't really conducive to that disease. We can time when insects are going to emerge, so we know to get the insecticide out at the proper moment. And then you can really bring down, say, your spraying to just to what you actually need, which again is always a cost saving. So really, we're trying to bring return on investment. You invest in my weather stations, and in turn, I can bring you, maybe 10 times as much savings on your farm. That's the short answer.
When you say weather stations, what are you talking about?
Well, we're measuring wind, solar radiation, temperature, and with the temperature, of course, is humidity, dew point. In the soils of where we do that, which is about half of our stations, we're measuring what's the soil moisture content down in that soil. As an example, this past year, a lot of people discovered the importance of that when we were dry. There were many instances where I told farmers, hey, you're not going to get what you want, but you're going to do better than you think, because, my weather station a couple miles from you, there is soil down there. And sure enough, a lot of these farmers said, Daryl, I was expecting 20, 25 bushel an acre wheat, and I got 42. Still not what they wanted, still not great, but it was better. So it's those things that we can help in agriculture. And of course, our data is used well beyond agriculture in many different ways. All the water basins this winter, the spring runoff potential, a lot of that will come from end-on sources, what that potential is actually going to be. What was the soil conditions last fall before they froze up? It goes back to the spring flooding next spring. So again, we're the agricultural weather network, but again, our data is used in a wide variety of different ways from a lot of businesses that you would never think would be interested in it, still use our weather data.
So the weather station itself, what does it look like? I've always wondered this. When you drive by that township road or that county road, how can I tell there's one of Daryl's weather stations?
We have two types. We have towers and tripods. So the tripods is just 3 legs, and they sit about 3 meters high, about 10 feet. And our towers actually go up to 33 feet, 10 meters. And so they're just like, think of it as a radio tower, but it only goes up to 30 feet rather than 1,000 feet, in that sense.
So there's no light on the top of it?
No, not on, except for one. Matter of fact, our crews heading down to Hettinger is close enough to the Hettinger airport that they requested that we put a light on it. We're actually doing that tomorrow, because it might hit 60 in Hettinger tomorrow. Beautiful day to do that. Most of them are not nearly that tall to do that. So we have a couple of varieties, but you usually, you will see a station that will have some white things that they're gill shields, and they let the wind flow in and out, but they're just a cylinder thing with little slots on it, like little roofing. That's our temperature sensors are in there, and then there's usually something spinning on the top that's telling you that the wind is blowing. That's how you can tell that they're end-on stations, almost always.
So are you ever looking for more of these? Or, how many did you have in the beginning versus now?
Oh, when I first started at end-on, we had 73. And so I've almost added 100 of those. I'm going to upgrade 16 next year from tripods to towers with the large grant I got from the Army Corps of Engineers, which is used for mainly the main purpose for the Army Corps wants them is for spring runoff potential into the Missouri River.
Okay.
Of course, we will use them for a number of different things, but that's why I got the money. But I will also, there's a group of farmers just to the east of Fargo and Moorhead out in western Becker and Otter Tail County that want some stations. Crystal Sugar's already approached me about adding some stations for their usage up in Polk County, so more in the northern Red River Valley, but on the Minnesota side. And then there's another group that wants some stations in some other parts of North Dakota. We only have so much time. I have a very small staff, but we will probably add, I would say, at least 4 or 5 more stations next year, and then do 16 major upgrades to our stations.
So this is going to grow and well, again, it comes down to leadership, how it grows, but the funding for it. You mentioned the Army Corps, others. I mean, how do you grow at this rate? I mean, there's got to be a couple bucks behind it.
We're talking hundreds of thousands, if not in the millions of dollars, when you're talking about the Army Corps. The thing I love about Andon more than anything else is it's a public-private partnership. And so you're dealing both private industry and the government. And so in that way, it's a great teamwork working together. My salary, I'm an NDSU employee. Government. Until the Army Corps grant and then another grant they got recently, we were pretty much outside of my salary, 100% supported by private industry, just by people's yearly maintenance fees to keep the stations up and their support coming forward. So I think it's a really great tool to be using going forward. It's a little bit of everything, because I always look at it this way, and this might be an odd example, but if you're driving down the interstate, well, the North Dakota Department of Transportation and MnDOT, both the Department of Transportation and Minnesota, they have little weather sensors or cameras on the station. If you saw like a weird wire hangling or the camera barely holding on to the station, would you stop and fix it, or would you stop and report it? Probably not. But when that happens to an Andon station, I get phone calls because it's somebody's weather station. They help support that station. It's their station. I always tell people, I might have 168 weather stations right now, but I really have one, yours. And so they take care of it. I get phone calls.
Take a lot of pride in it.
Oh, yeah, they do, because they help support it. It's their Andon station. They're making money, extra money off of that station. So in turn, I'll get phone calls. Hey, Daryl, I think this might be kind of funky, or I was by the station. You know, is this normal? Joys of cell phones now. Everyone has a camera in their pocket. I go, hey, could you take a picture? And they'll take a picture, and I go, everything's running, and we're getting our data back exactly the way we want, but that looks suspicious. Maybe a deer, which we do have, chewed on it a little bit and pulled it out. Let's make sure. And a lot of times we go, yeah, it was still working, but thank goodness this person told us. So then we were able to fix it before it did actually fail. That's the great thing about Andon, is just how much people, love the network, how much they take care of it, and how it's just such a, I would say, a prideful thing for so many individuals, including, of course, those of us who work at Andon.
See, I love the fact they take ownership in it. You know, as somebody who managed a rural water system for years, you know, people used to drive by. It was their rural water system. They were part of a rural water district. And the one thing they did is if they saw somebody vandalized it, or they saw that there might be some water around it, they thought of a water leak right away. I mean, that's who people up here in the Midwest are.
Yeah,
and I love that.
But it's that public-private getting both sides together. The Oklahoma Mesonet, which is probably the Cadillac of Mesonet, weather station networks, they have 120 stations. Last I had heard, they had over 30 employees, okay? Andon, right now, I only have 4 state-funded positions, including mine. I'm one of those 4. And then I have a couple of others that are on what we describe as soft money. It's grant money, things I have to come in to pay their support. But still, we're talking 6 employees with 168 stations, over them having more than 30 for 120. People always ask, how in the world do you do that? Public-private partnership.
Sure.
These people are responsible for that station. They take care of it. They'll mow it for me. They'll let me know when things are. They will get on the phone and we can talk them through some repairs. So it's a cost savings for everyone. That way, we don't have to have all these employees to support. So again, to me, it's a win-win. It's just an awesome way. Dr. John Enns, retired professor at NDSU, started this really in the late 1980s, and wow, his foresight to knowing the importance of this was just so profound, and we're so thankful, that he started. I mean, I took it over. We've done some stuff as a team together, yeah, but it still comes down to that initial Dr. Enns when he thought of this in the late 1980s to get it all started, and how much I would estimate, his idea probably has saved the state of North Dakota and western Minnesota probably in the hundreds of millions of dollars through the years.
Are there any places where you're blind, where you don't want to be blind?
There's a few spots that we need to fill. Some of it out western North Dakota will be filled with this Army Corps project because they don't want to be blind, so they're going to support stations in some of my dead spots. In eastern North Dakota, I have a couple, and I'm working right now with projects. One not too far from you in a way, parts of Richland County in the southwest corner and eastern Sargent County, where I think we have the funding in place, and going forward we'll get a station by Lidgerwood. That's a little bit of a gap that we have. I think we're going to get a station down by Fairmount, too, where there's a little bit of a gap in that area, and then a couple of other gaps that we're trying to infill. But I think by the time, give me another 3 or 4 years, and I think my team and I will infill all those gaps, so we'll have stations where at least we want them. My goal is to get an end-on station within 20 miles of every spot in North Dakota. Why 20 miles? Because research has shown that generally if you're within 20 miles of a station, all the parameters are still pretty much valid, with one big exception, of course, that's the rain. That varies in 10 feet, let alone in 10 miles. But that's been our goal. And so when I do talks, like when I was at Prairie Grains last week, my talk was, hey, if you live in these white spots, 'cause I have circles around all my stations, if you live in these like dead zones, please contact me and let's see what we can do working together to infill those.
Sure. So, in terms of the data, my assumption is, and you can correct me if obviously, you're the expert, but my assumption is the type of data that these are giving you are data that will tell me what's going on that day, but not necessarily what's going to go on in the future, where someone like you can read pattern. For me, it's like, okay, here's what's going on. Daryl just told me what's going on. But does it tell you what's going to be going on a year from now?
No, not necessarily. There are some tools, say if the soil was dry, you understand that probably until we get a really good soaking rain, which many of us ended up getting this autumn, at this point we're probably going to continue to see high temperatures above average for the next 2 or 3 weeks. I don't even think necessarily need to be a meteorologist to know that. There are simple approaches. The great thing about our network is if we would get violent storms, which we do on occasion through, and if they go from west to east, they're passing this station. Oh my goodness, the Jamestown Endon station just had a gust of 93 miles per hour, for example. It's coming in this direction. It gives you that warning in an hour or two. And sometimes that next 30 minutes is the most important 30 minutes of the whole month,
Sure.
For instance. But the long-term forecasting, no, but what I am working on doing right now is trying to take our end-on data and really initialize the conditions that we have in North Dakota and northwestern Minnesota, and then say running those 72 hours. Because really end-on still is a reactive system. Oh, we're at that point, we better spray. We better,
Sure.
or the insects are going to come out. What I want to do is get it to be more proactive.
Okay.
And that is the sense, okay, here's our conditions. This is where we're at. Say, Cercospora, a fungal disease for sugar beets. We're at this point. But do we need to spray for Cercospora? Well, sometimes I get phone calls and I go, well, guess what? Cold front's going to come through. Humidity is going to drop off. We're going to see 5 days in the 70s with low dew points, low humidity, in other words. Mm-hmm. So, the disease probably isn't going to progress. But what I'd like to do is like a chart, it's coming forward and starting to rise to that point is, okay, this is where we're at. Now let's take that data and run computer simulations 4 days in advance. Say out to 72 or 96 hours, and this is where those same things are. Because you can get a forecast, but are you getting fusarium head blight, wheat scab forecast for 3 days from now, Cercospora
So
forecast?
you're saving me money, is
Right.
what you just
So what
said.
I want to do is then take our data, but then simulate it out for 3 or 4 days, because usually guidance for those types of things is accurate enough that it would be useful. So then, yes, then you are taking my data going forward. Will we ever be able to take that out to 2 weeks? Probably not. But even that 3 or 4 day stretch could save you a lot of money. Because I do personal, no, I don't get anybody. People just ask me and go, hey, you have a cold front coming through, very cool air. It's going to drop in the 70s with low dew points for the last 3 days, for the next 3 or 4 or 5 days. So your disease risk is going to drop dramatically here. You know, give them that information. But I want that graphically in an app, so then people, you know, they still have to make the decision what they're going to do, but make that weather risk management, that decision tool for them to make better decisions.
So, Daryl, what's happening in our weather pattern? I mean, we just saw the devastation over the weekend down in some of our southern states, and the width and the length of some of the tornado activity. I mean, what's going on?
Well, first thing I need to remind everyone of is that there is no trend in tornadoes statistically since the 1950s to this point. And the trend for violent tornadoes, F3, F4s, F5, is actually down in the last 70 years. It's not rising, it's going downwards. And so bad things happen. The weather does weather things. You know, so many times people get so into what I describe as this statistical things. Well, this is the largest ever. And I go, well, it might be by 10 miles, but we weren't measuring things like this 20 years ago, let alone 100 years ago. So that 10 or 20 miles is irrelevant, you know, or, you know, sometimes it gets really political. For instance, well, this happened because of that. But say, you know, if it's an issue, well, if I'm in power, this is, everything's great. And then the other side will tell you, well, it's your fault. And then when the sides switch and the exact same scenario happens, then the other side goes, well, no, everything's fine. And the other side are saying stuff they didn't before. That kind of stuff happens in weather, sadly. It's, you know, you have to make points or scores. And I'm going, no, Joel, this is what I thought when I woke up that day. The thing is, I went to bed with that ongoing, and I woke up in the middle of the night, and I couldn't fall back to sleep. I grabbed my phone, and I thought, oh, my goodness, that cell is still going on. Wow. And then when I woke up the next morning, I saw the pictures, I saw the devastation, and here's my reaction. Wow. Thank goodness for the Weather Service and the tools and emergency management. I cannot believe that's all the human lives we lost. You know, I look at all this positive. I mean, 100 years ago, or even 60 years ago, you know, we had similar things, and we would get, you know, 600, 700, 800 people died with a much lower population base. So getting the warnings out, our infrastructure, our Doppler radars, getting those warnings out, you know, again, we can't stop bad things from happening, but, you know, we lessened the catastrophicness because, again, we can build the homes. We can do all of that. You can never bring that life back, as they say. And I was just so very much impressed with how well people heeded the warning to keep that death toll as low as it can. So it really always, to me, matters, how do you look at it? Half glass full, half glass empty when we go through that. But we're going to have other large tornado outbreaks. It's just a part of living in the United States.
So you're right. I mean, when it comes to the Weather Service and the warning, I mean, think of the devastation we would have had in the one factory that was making candles versus what we had, you know, without all that information. But the obvious question that's being floated out there is, do you believe that some of this in particular, could have been caused by global warming?
I would say no, because then why did these exact similar events occur in the past? We have such tornadoes in the 1880s that occurred. When we go forward, it was caused because all the correct ingredients came together. And Mother Nature does not know the time of year, doesn't know the calendar date. We had a tornado outbreak almost identical to this. This one is a little bit worse, but not a lot worse. That happened in December, a little bit later, December 18th, 1957, in that same area. It was just a smidge farther north. So Kentucky wasn't hit so much, but Illinois, Indiana, and Missouri were. So if you're going to blame this on that, well, then what caused that in the past? Mm-hmm. You know, to me, it always comes down, you know, Devil's Lake has been dry in the last 1,000 years. Devil's Lake has overflowed into the Cheyenne River naturally in the last 1,000 years. What caused that? The weather does the weather sometimes, and I'm not here to gain political points or to gain weather points or be in this group. You know, there's some horrid tweets this weekend about what caused this. And I'm going, no, why are you trying to make this point? This is not the opportune time to do that, to say say those things. But again, we've had similar events in the past. So you explain to me why that almost identical event then wasn't and this is. It's not that simple. As I'm fond of saying, if you ever hear me talk publicly, is X does not equal Y in weather. It is more complicated. That one thing does not cause another thing. You know, I read, well, there's a La Nina this year, so we had this bad tornado. And I'd go, we had a La Nina last year, that area didn't get hit by a tornado. It's not X equals Y. Again, it's more complicated than that going forward. So people like to oversimplify. And again, I don't understand why sometimes people just want to make, you know, like points or, you know, sometimes, you know, really political points or social points based on devastation, because we've had so many of these in the past.
So when you take a look at this particular case and you take a step back, you know, as you pointed out, the Weather Service came through. As you pointed out, you know, you've got something that could happen at any time. December being another example. Why is it that when I saw this, when I woke up, I thought, I don't remember that area or much of this country getting tornado activity this time of year. And maybe, you know, I was just flat out wrong, but it sure didn't seem like it was tornado season to me.
Well, there's always, I mean, December tornadoes happen. Like this one? No. Again, if this would have happened on November 30th, what's the difference between November 30th and December 10th? Just because it's December, but again, we had a big outbreak in this in December 18th, 1957, a little bit farther north than this event. Was it quite as bad? No, but it's probably 75, 80% as bad. But again, it's not apples to apples because we don't survey them. We didn't do exactly what we do now. The population of the United States has almost doubled since then. There's more targets. You know, that part of the United States has a very high percent of manufactured homes.
Yeah.
You know, those are the things that more, and there was research done decades ago about how that part of the United States is in what this author described as the nocturnal tornado alley, because it's prone to, timing-wise, to have a lot of nocturnal, which, you know, at night, thunderstorm, which this one has in advance. If you live here in Minnesota, North Dakota, pretty much every time we have a historic snowstorm up here, you think back to all the historic snowstorms we've had, we forget that if you look at that same date, there was almost always a severe weather outbreak down south. Yeah. So of all of our famous storms, they remember those days in history from severe weather. We remember them because we got a lot of snow.
Well, that little house I grew up in, Matador, since 1966 has not seen a snowdrift higher than the house. So it you know, when you say severe weather activity prior to all of this, there was. Daryl, always good to visit with you, man. Appreciate you coming on.
Well, thanks for having me on today.
Yeah, check out his work. Where do we find your work online?
Well, the easiest place, go to ndon.org or ndon.info, and you can find maps and stuff that we do within NDON.